Morning. So today we are looking at an essay called An Analysis of Press Translation Process this is by Sara Bani of the University of Bologna in Italy. So she's looking at what happens in the press by way of translation on the basis of her observation of an Italian daily called International. It's basically a newspaper which publishes articles which are translated from other European languages like English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So this is what she has to say about the process of translation in the press. Something with which we are very familiar, by the way, living in a post-colonial culture. Malayalam dailies also rely largely on translations from both news agencies and foreign and Indian newspapers. So it's very familiar to us. Okay. Now, how the translator is present in the translation. For example, how a translator's name is acknowledged, visible for readers, depends upon the culture of the press in various countries. Sometimes you find the name of the translator below the headline. Sometimes you don't find it at all. You don't find it even in the case of articles or news items which obviously look like translations. So this is what's happening. So in fact, we often discuss the invisibility of the translator. How a translator becomes virtually invisible in translation. Okay. The other problem with press translation is that readers cannot often recognize a translation as a translation. They often mistake it for an original piece of writing. Okay. So this is important because if you don't know that it's a translation, if you don't know that it has come from another culture, its significance is lost. You don't know what originally was there, or you don't even have a hint. Okay, we can't know what was originally there in the translation fully, but if we recognize this as a translation, at least we have a way of judging, guessing, yeah, this is from, let us say, an American newspaper, or a Hindi newspaper, or a Hindi publication, and it was originally published probably in Hindi or English or Arabic. So this is important. So we are looking at, Sara Bani is looking at what peculiarities one can find in press translation, the nature of the translation, the strategies which we employ in translation. Okay. So she says at the offset, at the beginning, that the percentage of translations in newspapers vary according to the culture or the nature of the newspaper. There are some newspapers which consist entirely of translated articles. That's because for a number of reasons. One is that it specializes in such news which are carried over from other cultures and languages. Two, the particular publication itself might be a virtually identical other language publication of some journal or weekly published elsewhere. Okay, so think of National Geographic, the well-known publication which specializes in news about nature and environment. So the National Geographic has editions in other languages. Although its primary edition is in English, it has editions in other. I think there is a Hindi version of the National Geographic also. So the Hindi version of the National Geographic consists entirely of translations. In fact, it is almost a mechanical reproduction of the original publication in English. Same, exactly the same, 100% translations. While there are other publications which publish a lot of translation. For a European daily, for example, can have news from other European nations, from America, Suppose it is in Portuguese or Spanish or Italian. What happens is they publish a lot of news translated from English, German or French. So the international, the newspaper which Sara Bani talks about is one which publishes such a large volume of translation. Okay. Now, one must remember that a daily works under a tight schedule. It has to bring out the paper by morning. All the matter has to go to the press by, let us say, 10, or for late editions at least by 2 in the morning. You have late editions, for example. When there is a World Cup match, you find that the city editions of many Malayalam newspapers in Kozhikode or Ernakulam, major cities, carry news of the match which concluded at 2 in the morning. So late. Atrayum vൈകിട്ടാണ്. Right. So, this is there. But the other news, they leave a page for such late news. Other news has to be processed by, let us say, 10 or 12 at night. So, tight schedule. So, all the translations have to be ready by a certain time. Okay. So, the sub-editors who specialize in translation have to work fast. Right. And also, there are other factors like the daily, especially newspapers. We don't take too much time reading newspapers. You don't read a newspaper like you read a text on translation studies, which is part of your syllabus. You read it over and over again. You don't stop with one reading. So what happens? If you are reading a newspaper, the time that is available for you is very short. So what you have to do is you have to the dailies, the staff at the daily have to prepare their news in such a way. If it's a translation, it has to be a very lucid, simple and easily readable translation. Otherwise, the readers won't be able to. They'll just leave the news and go to another one. If your translation is too complicated, right, too complex, difficult to read, well, what you do is you leave that news and go to another one on the same page or on another page. So that's why the newspapers are compelled to work with this idea in mind, a very tight schedule. Okay. Now, what kind of articles do newspapers select for translation? What kind of articles? They select articles which are from the languages which are known to the editors of the daily. Right. So, just a minute, I'll come back to you. Right. So, what do? They can select only from those languages which they know. So, take an average newspaper. For example, the international which the author talks about. It's an Italian. So, the languages they know probably are 4 or 5. Say Spanish, they might know. Portuguese, French, German, and of course, English. Take a newspaper in Kerala. Take a newspaper in Kozhikode or Ernakulam. What are the languages these sub-editors are likely to know? Of course, English. And some may know Hindi. And now, many may know Arabic. Yeah. So, your choice of articles or materials to translate are invariably from these languages. You don't have any other choice. Right. So, the language that you know. And, of course, your familiarity with the authors, types of text. If you ask a newspaper to publish something on environmentalism, Gadgil report, or such an important issue for which texts are available in, let us say, Hindi or Arabic, if the editors are not familiar with the topic, or in the case of some newspapers or publications, the editors may not be familiar with what is happening in sports and games currently. So you can't expect them to publish translations of that. Okay. And types of texts. Okay. what kind of texts are available. Okay, let us say stories, poems, essays, sometimes blog writing, what you find on blogs. Sometimes they make their way to newspapers. Okay, what you write on Facebook sometimes finds their way to a newspaper. They translate it if the matter is important. But suppose it's not important, and suppose the newspaper, the editors of the newspaper are not familiar with that kind of style or writing, they don't select it for translation. Right. So this is how the selection occurs. Okay. Now, in the process of translation, what you describe as a process of translation, how do you translate a text? What are the considerations that go to work? So I think I already mentioned what is called invisibility. The translator's name does not figure anywhere in the pages, right, on the pages. And the translator works with the full knowledge that his or her name will not appear on the page. Okay, it's an entirely thankless work in the sense of your name becoming familiar with the readers. No. Then, of course, the translator has to work loyally. What is that? Loyalty is to the policy of the newspaper. It's the kind of material that it carries, the kind of style that it employs, especially in political matters. You can immediately think of the K-Rail issue. So a daily which is not in tune with the current government's thinking, policy, will not publish an item which is in favor of this project. Right. And also the tonality of the translation. Okay. You find many news items, many essays slightly adapted or rewritten for the audience. You can also say manipulate. So the translators also have this responsibility of going ahead with the translation so that it gels with the policy of the daily or publication. Right. So this happens all the time, and this is the first stage of translation. Translation is not over. It doesn't get over so soon. What happens is it comes back to the editorial board for the final touch-up editing. So suppose you have done a very good translation. Good, fine, no problem there. But the editors have to tweak on it for various reasons. Sometimes, suppose a translation or even the subject matter, not the translation, subject matter offends a certain section of the population. That has to be edited. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പത്രം കുഴപ്പത്തിൽ ചാടുമല്ലോ. So the editors do that. Editors edit the available translation to weed out any such issues. Okay. Or a tonality, a tone which is not in tune with the paper's policy. The K-Railne പറ്റി മറ്റെന്തായാലും, whatever it is. അപ്പോൾ അതൊക്കെ ഒഴിവാക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി editors ഒന്നിരിക്കും. They sit over the text and tweak it to make it conform to the newspaper's policies and politics. Now, this is what is happening. Okay. So, one also has to think of whom the news item or essay or article aims at. What kind of audience is going to read? Every publication has an expected audience. അതില്ലാതെ പറ്റില്ല. ഇതാരാണ് വായിക്കുന്നത് എന്ന് മുൻകൂട്ടി കണക്ക് കൂട്ടിയിട്ടാണ് പത്രങ്ങൾ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കുന്നത്. Why? Because all dailies, all publications of this type survive on ads. They get ads from all sources, and the businesses which give them ads see to it that the news items are read by certain sections of people, and their ads are also targeted towards this audience. So that's why the editors have to be careful about their audience, and not only about the audience at what locale. ഇപ്പോൾ കോഴിക്കോട്ടെ എഡിഷനിൽ പബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്ത് പലപ്പോഴും അല്ല മലപ്പുറം എഡിഷനിൽ കാണുന്നത്, ഓർ ഇൻ തിരുവനന്തപുരം. The news which is published, the articles which are published in one edition are often missing in another edition. So a newspaper has to see all these. Okay. Apart from the normal routine questions of translation, such as cultural sensitivity. I'm coming to that a little later. All right. So not only that the editors look at all these facts, they also look at the focus. Okay. What kind of the text focus may be on something. Okay. The original text would be focusing on, for example, environmental degradation, whereas the editors wanted to focus on mismanagement, okay, overspending, all such things. So what they do is they tweak it, they slightly change it, okay. And of course, not to speak about the page in which this article is. If it is to be published in the center page, everybody will see it. So they are more careful. If it is to be shunted to the back page, okay, not in the front or middle page, center page, or back, or just the back page. So what happens? They are less careful. Okay, they let it go. They don't spend too much time on it. So all these are factors which determine translation in the press. ഇതൊക്കെ നോക്കിയാലേ കാര്യങ്ങൾ കൃത്യമായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് പിടികിട്ടുള്ളൂ. How even the title may be changed. Okay, you have seen that. Just check the titles of some English of news, of some English dailies, and their corresponding items in Malayalam dailies. You'll find that the titles often do not match. They are changed according to the requirements of the audience. See, for example, the classic case, I'll tell you. Some time back, 3 or 4 years back, there was a scandal about a governor of a union territory, and that he was involved in a sex scandal. Okay, dailies in Malayalam just reported the facts headline. Okay, governor ലൈംഗിക അപവാദ വിവാദത്തിൽ. It is simple, the facts. Whereas some Hindi newspapers which had an axe to grind, as if they were taking revenge on this person, they published the news with this title, Fir Phase, and then the name. Fir Phase means again in the soup. Fasna means to be in trouble, in colloquial language, to be in the soup. So they said this governor was again in the soup. There was another allegation against him. A young man claimed that he was this VIP's son. The case went on in court. There was a DNA test, and finally it was proven that this young man was indeed the governor's son. You know, so the Hindi dailies were not careful at all. They didn't bother about such things like defamation. They gave absolutely no regard for it. Probably they were people with clout. Even if the governor filed a case for defamation, they could challenge that. They could survive such a case in court. That's the reason why they did. The Malayalam newspapers had no such intention. So they just gave the ordinary title. Right. So this is what happens. Okay. Now, she also notes that in many dailies, the readers write to the newspaper. Sometimes they point out the inaccuracies. Okay, often that's what happens. If it's a translation, the readers might know better. You know, that happens. So if somebody publishes an article on, let us say, a food item served in Kozhikode, how it is cooked. Or for example, if you look at K.T. Achaya, A.C.H.A.Y.A. He has written a book called Indian Foods and Beverages, a Historical Companion. So in this book there are references to some culinary delights which you get in Kerala. There are a few inaccuracies. ചെറിയ തെറ്റുകളാണ്. So if you publish, serialize this in a newspaper, there will be readers who will give their feedback. Okay. Sometimes, sometimes when they expect the article to be impartial, unedited, the readers in this language might not know what was originally published, but there might be a few readers who know both languages. And they'll be a little upset at the kind of changes that the editors of this daily made. So they'll also give a feedback. Why did you change this? In the original it was so and so. Now you have made it such and such. This happens. So a publication has to be careful about such feedbacks also. Now, let's come back to this issue which I mentioned a little ago. Cultural sensitivity. What is cultural sensitivity? Cultural sensitivity is sensitivity or awareness about the cultural differences between the source culture and the target culture, or the source language and the target language. So what is considered as sensitive, taboo in one culture may not be so in another culture. Okay, you think of an article which discusses sexuality in, let us say, a language like Czech. They have a very liberal attitude. So they will discuss a large number of things which do not look well on the pages of a Malayalam or Hindi newspaper. So a lot of editing would have gone into the process of translation. So some of the readers will be a little upset because they find that apart from cultural sensitivity, some important issues, some important pieces of information are missing, in fact, simply because they are considered unmentionable in a Malayalam or Hindi newspaper. They might be missing. So readers would be upset over that too. How can you just throw away this piece of information just because it's considered a little too risk to be published in a Malayalam newspaper? You have to tell the readers about the basic facts. They'll say, right. Now, there are other issues like the unawareness or unfamiliarity of one culture about another. So we don't know much about what is called dating in the Western cultures. What happens when a young boy and a girl date? Is it allowed by their parents? Okay. What do they do when they go out? How free they can be? So we don't know, but they know. So if you get an article about dating in America, one of the things that the editors will have to do is to over-translate it. Over-translate it, so by giving explanations, etc., which were not there in the original article. You have to tell readers about what dating, at what age young boys and girls date, what happens, how free they can be. Okay, do they do it with their parents' consent? All these things are not known to us, so they have to be made explicit. So this is what is called over-translation. They add these bits of information. On the other hand, there is what is called under-translation. You don't have to mention many things because the target culture already knows it. Suppose they are writing, an American researcher is writing about Kerala's Marumakkatayam, matrilineal system, where the head of the family is not the father but the uncle, Velliyammavan. So we know much about it by virtue of living here in Kerala. A reader in America may not. A reader in Britain may not. So the author would have given extensive explanations which we don't need. So you simply remove them. Nothing happens to the article. Okay. The author would say, for example, in a matrilineal system, the uncle is the head of the family. All the female members live in their homes where they were born. They don't go out. Their husbands come to them, etc., etc. We know all this. Why do we have to bother to read all this when we know all this? So the editors often remove such references. This is called under-translation. Okay. And then, another important point, I already mentioned readability. That the reader of a newspaper, so often in a hurry, when you go to an office, in the midst of a busy schedule, we just take the newspaper, glance at it, read a few quick attempts at getting at the main news and throw it away. In America, there are newspapers with 80, 90 or 100 pages, such bulk. I don't know if it is still there. Probably after the online revolution, they have disappeared. But I've read that what many busy people do is they buy a newspaper. Right? If they are traveling in a car which has a driver, what they do is they sit at the back and go through the newspaper, and just before they reach their destination, they open the glasses, throw the newspaper into the dustbin. Okay. So for such casual readers, you don't have to go into all the basic details. They are useless. They don't need these details. So what do they do? They simply publish the minimum of details for the reader to read. And they cut down on all the details. Because reading is quick and casual. Not only quick but casual. You don't take a newspaper very seriously, as you take a book or an essay which is prescribed for you to study. So the editors have to, first the translators, the sub-editors, then the editorial board has to take a decision on what to do with these articles, okay, which are very lengthy, which give too many bits of information which the readers don't need. I mean, the judgment is made by the newspaper. There might be a few readers who read from beginning to end, all the pages. Readers who have the time, news about fashion, news about entertainment. Okay, even in Delhi you have newspapers with 40 or 50 pages, and there are pages which target specific readers. Fashion, okay, entertainment, cinema, okay. There are full page reviews of films, currently running films. Okay, so people who are interested in those things read those. So if you are translating, if you are publishing the same daily from, let us say, Kozhikode, you cut down on the number of pages. You don't include all those pages on fashion or entertainment, reviews on films, which an average reader in Kozhikode or Thiruvananthapuram does not need. Right? So this is another strategy. So as a result of which, sometimes the entire article might be abridged. Okay. So the translation is only a summary. So we are often used to think of translation as very faithful, loyal. But news in translation would show that this is not the case. Plenty of changes are made. Sometimes a large article is cut down. Okay. Occasionally it is expanded because we don't understand what is happening. We don't understand about space being commercialized. There are space vehicles which run in the private sector. You pay something like $10 lakh, you have a trip to space. Commercialization of space. We don't know much about it. So if there is an article about it, the editor will have to not summarize it but expand it. Only then we get what is happening. Sometimes, you have a cultural factor discussed. Okay, like for example, we talk about Manassammadam, the ceremony of common among Christians, like our engagement. So Manassammadam is a cultural factor. Okay, so imagine that a translator is translating an article about the marriage of a celebrity. Okay, so you'll have a sentence like കഴിഞ്ഞ ജനുവരി 10-നായിരുന്നു മനസ്സമ്മതം, കല്യാണം കുറച്ച് നീണ്ടുപോയി, ആൻഡ് അവസാനം ഏപ്രിൽ 26-ന് വെച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ്. So this മനസ്സമ്മതം, unless you explain it in detail, we don't know what is it. But suppose you translate it as just engagement, the word. So the cultural element is removed by a more generic term, like generic medicine, where you don't have a brand name. It's just the substances that go into the medicine. So similarly, Manassammadam can be translated as engagement. No problem. Okay. So this also happens. A cultural element is sometimes just removed. Okay. There's such a ceremony. When a woman is 7 months pregnant, when you're in your own home, your in-laws visit you with eatables, palaharakketu. So this is Vairugana. So once if you say Vairugana, it becomes too complicated. What you do is you just say something like, when the in-laws came visiting at the end of the 7th month, finished. So this is done sometimes. Removal of cultural items, changing it for more generic terms. Okay. Sometimes, of course, engagement is in Western cultures, you have to put a ring on the woman's finger. The suitor does it. It becomes engagement. So if you say engagement, the Western people, they are reminded of their own ceremony. So you do this out of compulsion, so that the news is translated in time. You meet the deadline. Ratri 10 manikku mumbu news ethanam. So what you do is you adopt all these strategies. Okay. Not only that you adopt strategies like over-translation, removal of culturally specific items, substitution by other culturally specific items, etc., etc. You resort to other methods. What are they? One, giving subheadings so that you understand the news item or the article better. Subheadings which were not there in the original article. Okay. Suppose there is something about, let us say, depression, global depression. So you have to, if the editorial board decides, you have to give various subheadings, like the price of oil, okay, a glut in the market, okay, loss of employment. So you give one subheading after the other. So this will actually strike the reader's eyes. If you see a large article without subheadings, you think it's too boring or very difficult to understand. So you don't read them. Whereas if you see these subheadings, what happens is you suddenly grow interested. You know that there's something important here. Something which might immediately interest you, so you go to them. Okay. But that is not all. You have pictures, So for an average Malayali, you don't have to have pictures about Thiruvadira to know what Thiruvadira is. But for, let us say, a Western reader, an English or German or American reader, if you have a picture of this Kakkuzhi-Maliakkal, where women dance, or the swing on which children, men and women swing during Thiruvadira, it adds to the piece of information. And vice versa also, their culture, for example, a formal engagement, okay, a corporate party, what will be served at a corporate party. So you publish pictures, photographs, maps sometimes. Okay, when you're discussing K-Rail, for example, you publish a map in American daily. So they don't know what is it. They don't know where this rail is going to be constructed, the places through which it passes. Okay, so they need maps. So you publish maps. Chronologies. What are chronologies? Chronologies you find in many newspapers. When you read an article, just below it you'll find Idum Kanuga, also see a number of other related items published in previous editions. So today is 24th. So you'll be asked to read. Sorry. So you'll be asked to read something which was published on, let us say, 23rd or 22nd. Okay. So this is very common, asking you to refer to some other article, chronologizing the articles. Okay. Then glossaries, which are not very common. Word meanings. Okay. Some 4 or 5 terms are glossed, like Tiruvadira. What is Tiruvadira? Okay. What is Tiruvadira Kali? Okay. And sometimes references to web or print sources. Also see, you'll be given a URL. You can go and look at this URL. Right. So all these are very common. These are actually, all these processes are called over translation. So next time somebody asks you about over translation, you must remember that all these processes are together called over translation. Not to speak about extra information about the author. Who the hell is this man or woman? Many readers will think. So what you have to do is you have to tell them, look, this is the author. He has published such and such an article. He is well known for his work in such and such a field. So this is also a process of over translation, a process by which you supplement your translation. Got it? Okay. You have a translation. For the translation to be properly understood by the audience, you have to tell them more. So this is called over translation. So remember all the other things which we have so far discussed about translation, such as the linguistic convergence, okay, stylistic convergence or divergence of the languages. You know, a Malayalam and English would have been structured differently. They would have had different styles for writing different things. For example, a Malayalam daily would publish news in very informal language, which is probably not done by an English daily published in India, or more so a daily in English published from Britain or America. So there is this thing which we call the difference. Okay, linguistic difference, cultural difference, policies of the translator, ideology. We discussed all this when we talked about O.V. Vijayan's author translation of Kazakhiന്റെ ഇതിഹാസം in his translation under the title Legends of Kazakh. So we saw all that. So what I'm trying to say is that all these are applicable to press translation also. So what Sara Bani does in this article is to look at some of the important features, problems, okay, complexities of translation on the basis of what is actually happening in this daily called International, published from Bologna in Italy, a well-known newspaper which publishes lots of translations, which often specialize in publishing translations. So Sara Bani's article is an attempt to get at the basics of press translation in the press. Thank you.